Another generation passed, and as the 1990s began, a new threat to world peace was developing, this time in the Middle East. On August 8, 1990, Saddam Hussein ordered his Iraqi troops to take over the nation of Kuwait. Americans were caught in the conflict immediately, including one man with Iowa ties.
A month after the invasion of Kuwait, on September 19th, Iraqi forces began rounding up Americans and taking them hostage. Among them was 56-year-old Charles Keegan, an investment analyst working for a company in Kuwait. Keegan's two daughters lived in Des Moines, and quickly the actions in the Middle East affected Iowans directly. The 30 hostages were taken to Baghdad as human shields, held by the Iraqis as protection against invasion by the U.S. About a month into their captivity, Keegan and the others were allowed to make brief phone calls to family members. Soon, those family members decided to take matters into their own hands.
The final leg of a very long journey to Baghdad. This is an Iraqi Airways Boeing 707, completely full, headed to Baghdad. All the members of the Coming Home group are on board, as well as a contingent of British women who are going to Baghdad to try and accomplish the same thing.
The Coastal Oil Corporation was Iraq's chief customer for oil. Coastal's chief executive, Oscar Wyatt, and former Texas Governor John Connally helped organize a group of family members that traveled to Baghdad in December 1990 to privately negotiate release of the hostages. WHO-TV reporter Scott Pope and photojournalist Mike Borland were the only media members invited along on the trip, and they quickly learned about some local customs.
We were told going in, before we went into Iraq, that we could not import Iraqi dinar. You had to do the exchange of American currency for Iraqi dinar once you got to Baghdad. And we were told that the exchange rate was $4 for one Iraqi dinar. So we had a bunch of cash with us, and when we were in the Amman airport, there was a currency exchange like you see in other airports. And I just happened to look up on the board, and it had Iraqi dinars, and it had the exchange rate to be the very opposite. And I told Mike, I said, we should probably take a couple of $100 out of the American currency that we have and exchange it just in case we need a cab or something like that. So I went up, and I gave him $300 or $400 of American dollars and got a wad back of Iraqi dinars. And I gave half to Mike, and I stuffed half in my pocket. Long story short, we had about $1,200 in American currency in my carry-on bag that got put into the cargo hold. I saw it go in there. When we got to Baghdad and waited for the bags to come out, all of them came out on the conveyor, and my carry-on bag came out, and I opened it up, and the $1,200 was gone. So we were, in effect, out of money except for those $400 worth of dinar, which actually got a 1,600 dinar because of the exchange rate in Jordan. So that's what we lived on for the whole week we were there. So that was kind of interesting. That was the first encounter with I guess what you'd call somewhat nefarious people.
Pope and Borland could not travel in the city without Iraqi minders going along. The WHO team worked with NBC staffers who were based in the Al Rashid Hotel in editing stories, but getting the material back to Des Moines was not easy.
And we'd sit down and pop our pieces in that we'd edited back in the hotel at the NBC suite. And the minder would go through the tape one time, then he'd back it up to the beginning, and he'd go however many seconds in, put an edit in, go another 30 seconds, put an edit out, so you can't show that. So we would end up sending back our pieces via microwave and satellite back here with big holes in them. We had access to them, but we would get together and we could sit down and talk with them, but we could not shoot any video. The first day, we just kind of met Chuck, made sure he was okay and everything was good. And the second day, we went back over there, and Mike had his camera on his shoulder and had it turned on. And it was basically shooting in hidden camera, I guess is the best way to describe it. And we got some really good stuff from Chuck, and we got back and we put our piece together. And we were sitting in the NBC suite at the Al Rashid, and Mike Silver, the producer, was looking over my shoulder, and he says, "You'll never get that through the minders. You'll never get that through the minders." We put the piece together, and it got through. Nobody said a thing. And so we had the first interviews with the hostages, too.
Details of the announcement are still being sorted out tonight, but it appears at face value that Saddam Hussein is willing to release all foreign hostages. That still remains to be seen. However, it is the best possible news that Tom Van Bali and Peg Keegan could have received today.
When word came that the hostages would be freed, NBC offered to help Pope report live via satellite from Baghdad, which was a rare occurrence in 1990.
I ended up doing a live shot with Bachman. I think we went about 4 or 5 minutes. And it got done at our end back in Baghdad, and I got out of the chair, and Mike Silver came up to me and he said, you know, up until this point, only 3 news organizations in the world have ever done a live shot out of Baghdad: CNN, NBC, and WHO-TV of Des Moines, Iowa. So I thought that was pretty cool. And we were walking through the courtyard after we'd done the live shot, and an entourage was coming in the other direction, 4 or 5 people, and it was dark, couldn't really see them, and they got right upon us, and I turned and looked, and it was either Saddam Hussein or one of his doubles, but it was him with security around him. So I was actually within arm's reach of him at one time and didn't really notice. So I do remember that.
The day before the hostages were released after nearly 3 months in captivity, Pope noticed a curious-looking man making his way around the lobby of the hotel where the families were staying.
And he says, "Are you Scott Pope?" And I said, "Yeah, who are you?" And he said, "I'm so-and-so. I work for Mr. Wyatt and Mr. Conley." He said, "We're leaving tomorrow. Do you want to be on the plane?" And I said, "Yeah, we do." Got there, the hostages were already there in the terminal, in just a regular waiting area like you'd see at our airport. But we sat there for about 6 or 7 hours. I think there were some final negotiations that were going on, and the jubilation that erupted inside the plane by these guys. It was something. It was pretty emotional. And it went on for, 2 hours. We had heard there was going to be a pretty big crowd, and we landed on this air base and came down the runway, and you look out the window, and the throngs of people were just amazing. There were thousands of people there, waving American flags. There was even a high school band there. And I remember we pulled up, there was no jetway, it was just stairs to come down off the plane. And we'd told the Conley's crew that we need to be off first. We need to get video of these guys, coming off the plane. So I was the first one down, and Mike was the second one down. And as soon as we came down the stairs, the place just erupted. We got down to the apron. The hostages started coming off the plane. And Charlie came down the steps and got to the apron and got down his hands and knees and kissed the ground. And the barricade that the cops had set up for people just caved in. And there was just this mass rush up to the airplane.
I love every one of you. I love every one of you.
In Baghdad, Scott Pope, News Center 13.
As it became clear that war was imminent, the Iowa National Guard organized a media tour of Saudi Arabia, where U.S. forces were stationed, to allow Iowa journalists the chance to report on our forces before they began their mission. WHO Radio continued its tradition of covering wars by sending reporter Bob Quinn, and Des Moines television stations also participated, including KCCI-TV reporter Jeff Greenwood.
Iowa units did start receiving the call-up in the fall of 1990, and that included the 1133rd Transportation Company out of Mason City. There are soldiers who are members of that unit from all over Iowa, particularly north-central Iowa, even in southern Minnesota. So this is a unit that impacted our viewing area, and we thought if there's any opportunity for us to be able to tell the story of Iowans in the Gulf, we wanted to do it.
Free time is good for some soldiers and bad for others. It's good because it can get their minds off of what they're doing. But it can be bad because it gives them time to think about what they may be doing.
People were curious. What kind of living conditions do they have? What are they eating? What are they doing day in and day out? How are they preparing? What are they afraid of? What do they miss?
You wouldn't think it'd be this cold in the desert.
If you think you need a hot morning shower to make it through the day, you won't make it with the 1133rd. If there is any water left, chances are it's bone-chilling cold due to the overnight near-freezing temperatures. It'll make your head ache and your body numb.
Everything they did, we did, except for fight a war.
Greenwood and the other journalists from Iowa lived on site with the 1133rd, close to the Kuwaiti border, which would soon be a war zone.
The men and women stress their company morale is high, even though the threat of war appears imminent. They say they're anxious. They want something done one way or another.
What really made an impression on me was at the time we all thought, myself included, that at any moment Saddam Hussein could launch a chemical attack. And they made that impression on us. They said at any time you may hear an alarm and you must get this equipment on. And we were all briefed on putting on this chemical equipment, including gas masks. And it was very scary at one point when we heard an alarm go off, and we all had to stop what we were doing, and we all had to put the equipment on. Turns out it was a drill. But when you hear that piercing alarm and you know that you have to stop what you're doing right now and put on that chemical equipment, it's serious.
There was no censorship of the reporting at that time, other than rules ensuring the safety of the reporters and prohibiting mention of the 1133rd's specific location. As it turned out, the journalists were on site for 10 days.
But toward the end of our trip out there, they made it very clear that they were starting to gear up for a potential attack, and it was time to leave.
While some of Greenwood's video was sent back to Des Moines at the time, most of it was recorded for editing and air after his return, which coincided with the first days of active war.
This was an opportunity for us to localize a worldwide story. This wasn't a story about the big picture. This was a story about Iowans preparing to go to war.
Greenwood says the 1133rd traveled millions of miles during the war and gained the reputation of being the most reliable unit of its type during the Gulf War.
They were a can-do unit, and they had the Iowa work ethic. They came out to an area that was unfamiliar to them, but they had a job to do, and they did it. This was in an area with a different culture, an area with a different climate, and an area with a lot of uncertainty, and they did their job as well as any unit could be expected to do.